and welcome to a very special episode of Palace Confidential, brought to you by The Mail. I'm Jo Elvin, and joining me today is a broadcaster and Daily Mail columnist who is a leading authority on the British royal family and who was a key part of the BBC's coverage of the recent royal funerals. Gosh, plural funerals. I'm talking, of course, about Robert Hardman, who has written a number of books on the late Queen and has updated his most recent book, Queen of Our Times, The Life of Elizabeth II, 1926 to 2022, for a special commemorative edition. You can click the link below if you want to buy it. So, Robert, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jo.
You've updated the book to include the sad passing of Her Majesty, the lead up to that, the aftermath. Did you imagine that you would be updating it so soon after it being released?
No, I had absolutely no idea. I'd always had every confidence, actually, that I'd probably be doing a centenary edition.
I thought so.
I always looked forward to that day when I'd see the Queen pondering whether she should send a 100th birthday card to herself, which would have been a rather sweet conundrum to have. So, no, like everyone else, I mean, I was totally taken aback by it. But having brought out the book at the back a few months ago, just ahead of the Jubilee, I really wanted to, obviously, complete it's the life of Elizabeth II. But I did feel that, I mean, we have had the most extraordinary royal year, and set aside the very sad but extraordinary events of September, the whole summer with the Platinum Jubilee. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment. What was very clear to me was that she was absolutely on duty to the end. I don't think people fully understood quite what an effort it was to get herself fully up and ready and prepared for two prime ministers. I mean, that was the thing she'd been worrying about all summer, was the fact that the government was effectively rudderless. I mean, the prime role of the monarchy is to ensure the efficient business of government. And there really hadn't been a government because obviously Boris Johnson had resigned as party leader but not as prime minister, and as soon as a new party leader was elected, then it was time to switch, and that's when she came in. And she'd even, when I was writing this update, the epilogue at the end, I talked to many people inside the palace, and the Queen had been really, up until about August, had been very keen on coming down from Balmoral herself, because she said, look, the government it really needs to get going. The last thing I want is for the news cameras to sort of show prime ministers all trekking up to the Highlands. I'm the Queen. It's my duty to go down to London and do this as efficiently and quickly as possible. And there were plans afoot for her to get on the royal train and come down overnight in order to appoint the new prime minister, Liz Truss. But as the weeks went on, it was clear that would be taking its toll on her. And so in the end, her doctors said, look, I really think the prime minister should come to you, and no one else was going to going to criticise the Queen. But it was such a thing for her to do this, to see this handover done properly.
And what an annoying waste of time that turned out to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, but all through her reign, these moments, appointing prime ministers, making sure government happens, it's incredibly important, and she just wanted to get it right.
Well, you do say in the book as well that she had been tying up loose ends right up to the end, what you described as the too difficult folder. What do you mean by that?
Well, they'd always had at the palace a list of things that needed sorting out, and if they didn't need sorting out right away, it would be a case of, put it away in the too difficult folder, we'll sort it out another time.
I've got a very big one of those.
We've all got a few of those.
Yeah.
And one of the things in the too difficult folder was the question of what happens to the former Duchess of Cornwall, former Camilla Parker Bowles, then Duchess of Cornwall. It was announced when she married the Prince of Wales in 2005 that when the time came, she would be known as the Princess Consort. That was just what was accepted at the time. It was, the memories were sort of still fresh, in some cases raw, of the now King's, divorce in 1996. And so that was a sort of settled view. But as time went on, and I think particularly after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and everybody reflecting on actually how important it is for a monarch to do the job well, they've really got to have a consort at their side who is, there and happy and confident. And I think, I know the Queen felt, when Charles becomes king, his wife should be queen. Every wife of every king through history has been a queen, so that's as it should be. And so earlier in the year, we saw a very interesting announcement. I don't know if you remember the New Year's honours when the Duchess of Cornwall, as she then was appointed to the Order of the Garter. That was quite unusual for the wife of a royal wife who isn't yet a consort.
Right.
So that was quite telling. And then on Accession Day, on the actual anniversary of coming to the throne, the Queen put out a statement, and the main point in it was, it's my sincere wish, she said. And when the Queen had a sincere wish, it usually came true.
See, that wasn't so difficult, was it? It wasn't too difficult at all.
It wasn't at all. and I mean, all that happened was everyone went, well,
okay.
That seems all right.
So did anything surprise you when you were putting together this book? What did you learn?
I think what surprised me was the element of surprise, because all the way through, writing through her life, through the whole reign, everything is everything is planned. Everything is done carefully. I mean, the Queen always did everything. She was, the fact that she had a great sense of duty. I mean, we all know that. But actually, when you see it time and again, how whatever problem she might have, she might not, be feeling well, or might have, the times might have been really grim, but she still got on with it because that was duty. And suddenly, in the last year of her life, she wasn't turning up to things at the last minute.
Yeah.
And for good reason. I mean, she was starting to feel unwell, but that coloured all the arrangements for the Jubilee, and all the previous Jubilees have been planned long in advance. They were wonderful. I mean, they're all wonderful events, but this was the first one which had every event for the whole of 2022 had to have a Plan A and a Plan B. Plan A was Queen turns up. Plan B is Queen can't turn up, and all through the last months of her life, these events, whether it was Commonwealth Day or whether it was the memorial service for the Duke of Edinburgh, Plan A and Plan B were side by side.
Tell me what it was like for you. You were very much on the ground throughout the period of mourning, constantly on television, one place or another. What did you make of it all? What was it like to be in the thick of that?
It was incredibly powerful. I mean, I still now can't quite believe some of the things we saw. I mean, I talked about that element of surprise all through the year. But I was very happily and pleasantly surprised, actually, by the way that everybody just came together. I was expecting there might be, might be elements who, as soon as the Queen died, said, right, well, that's enough of this monarchy show. Time for a referendum, or debating about different aspects of what was going on. It didn't happen at all. I think it was just a huge outpouring of grief, of respect. Along with this great sense of goodwill for the new monarch. I mean, that was very striking. But everywhere I went during those days, mixing with the crowds outside the palace. I went up to Scotland for all those wonderful scenes in Scotland. I mean, people have often said, do you think she wanted to die in Scotland? And who could possibly answer that question? But let's just say that I think talk to anybody who her family or those around her, they certainly think that it was, it worked very well. It was.
You always get a sense that a huge part of her heart.
She was the most Scottish monarch
Yeah.
since James I and VI, in terms of her lineage. I mean, through the Queen Mother, she was descended two ways from Robert the Bruce. I mean, she felt when she was in Scotland, she just felt at home.
Yeah.
And so I think she the way it turned out, and she was the first British monarch to die in Scotland. I mean, all previous British monarchs since the Act of Union have died in England.
Wow.
So that lent that extraordinary Scottish dimension to those first few days. It was so powerful.
Yeah.
And she would have loved that. Absolutely loved it.
That's wonderful. But now you do write, obviously, about the many familial challenges that she faced in the months before her death. We'll get through a lot of them, but let's start with that incident with Prince Andrew speaking to the cameras about the nation's grandfather in the wake of Prince Philip's death. How do you think she felt about that? How do you think she handled it?
Oh, I think, in the wake of the Duke of Edinburgh's death, I think it was entirely right and expected that all the children would have their chance to pay tribute.
There was controversy, though, wasn't there, in that some people felt like he was using it as
I think,
a rehabilitative moment.
Yes, no, I mean, clearly he's a divisive figure, and whatever he does, I think people will question his motives. But I think in the aftermath of his father's death, it was entirely appropriate that he should, he, like everybody else, should say a few words. And then, of course, we had earlier this year the memorial service for the Duke. There was some surprise when he ended up escorting the Queen to that service. I mean, no one was going to object to him being there. It had all been sorted out. I mean, if you look at the order of service, last time I looked online, it's still there with him arriving in the sort of correct line of precedence at the Great West Door with everybody else. So that was very much a last-minute change after everything had gone to print, that he decided. He I think, effectively asked to be allowed to escort the Queen, which, on the day of the Duke's memorial service, if that's what the Queen wants, that's what the Queen should have. I mean, no one was going to stand in the way of that. But it inevitably meant that the focus of the day wasn't entirely on the Duke of Edinburgh. A lot of it was on the Duke of York.
Well, as you were saying in the book, it caused a lot of people to roll their eyes in the palace. But is that code for perhaps stronger sentiment and language?
I think a lot of people in the palace would have much preferred the Duke of York to stick to the plan, and the fact that he rearranged the plan. Well, but I think everyone just took the view. The more sort of people get wound up about this or try and stop it, the more that becomes the story. So. And actually, on the day, as we all saw, the Queen didn't really need a lot of helping or supporting. She walked very confidently into the Abbey. They'd shortened the route, so rather than coming down the full length from the West Door, she came in through Poets' Corner, which made total sense. But she was absolutely determined to be at that. And then not long after that, she then wasn't there at Easter, at Maundy, Royal Maundy, an event that she's always loved. So again, we got worried about that. But then soon after that, there she was at the Windsor Horse Show. Wonderful evening in the park at Windsor. And it was, I remember I was there. It was a fairly chilly evening. It was raining. And she turned up in the evening and took her seat, and I was actually sitting in the grandstand a little behind her, and we were sort of told by the organisers, look, if the Queen gets up to leave, please don't all sort of stand up and make a sort of big scene. If she leaves, she wants to leave quietly. So we all carried on, and she just sat there throughout. She loved
Amazing.
it. Stayed all the way through, and at the end did a sort of lap of honours. So I thought after that, the Jubilee's looking all right.
Now, here we go with everyone's favourite subject, Prince Harry. There were so many things to deal with, weren't there? There was the will they, won't they element of them coming to the country, them actually coincidentally being here when she passed, to the court case over whether or not he could have royal protection, naming his daughter Lilibet, whether or not he had permission is sort of slightly unclear, the Netflix crew. Endless list. How do you think she dealt with all that? How do you think she felt about it all?
I think with Harry, there was always a great sense, right to the end. She adored Harry. Harry adored her. He could sort of, not quite do no wrong, but I mean, he was still very much loved, and he had a sort of a direct line of communication to her. I mean, clearly, she must have been sort of exasperated by a lot of the things going on. But I think, in a sense, I think Andrew, the Duke of York, was the greater worry because, Harry's got his life ahead of him. He's fine. He's happy. He's got a wife and young family, and he has options. And I think her concern was that the Duke of York didn't have options.
Do you think that she was, we talked about that too difficult folder, just sort of like palm all that off to Charles for him to deal with when it comes to Andrew?
I think with Andrew there was no kind of short-term solution. I mean, I think yes. I mean that remains in the sort of too difficult folder, if you like. But with Harry, when he came, she was very keen to see him. There was definitely a sense that through the year, the direction of travel was towards some sort of rapprochement. He didn't come to the Duke of Edinburgh's memorial service, but then a few weeks later he did come on his way through to the Invictus Games, and he saw the Queen then, and then he and Meghan were here with the children during the Jubilee. And so gradually through the year we were seeing things thawing. I mean, we weren't seeing a sort of, complete, any sort of a reunion, but very much the general path of the sort of Harry's relationship with the rest of the family seemed to be converging towards some sort of reconciliation. I think she would have found that comforting. She would have liked that.
But what do you think about, there were the eye-raising comments from Harry about making sure the Queen has the right people around her.
I'm here to protect her, and there are things that only we can talk about.
But she was, notoriously loyal to her staff. How do you think she handled that situation?
I think, as with all these things, she was quite, she could understand, Harry's situation. I always think with the Queen, it's always worth remembering she's always had this understanding. You could call it a soft spot, but I'd certainly say it's an empathy with number two child in every case. Her father was a younger son, and that brought with it its own problems. She was always very indulgent towards Princess Margaret when others weren't, because she always remembered, for her, she was the number two. She had to. It was different for her, and it's the same with Prince Andrew. It's the same with Harry. They're constantly, they're born into this sort of supporting role,
quote unquote spare.
Yes, I mean, you've got your heirs and your spares, and she's always had a very, her faith, as I keep writing through the book, is incredibly important. She's very forgiving all through her life. She was prepared to see the best in everybody and hope for the best. And so I think, with Harry, with Andrew, as with her sister, she could understand that, yes, to the outside world, it might look as though they've got this wonderful world of privilege, which they do, clearly. But it comes with a whole set of conflicts and family dynamics that are put a lot of stress on those who are gradually, if you like, moving away from the centre. One line is going onwards and ever upwards, and the other one is sort of gradually being parked.
What do you think, or do you think rather, that over the decades she changed the way she managed and handled those stresses and strains, particularly with the family dynamic?
I think certainly we've seen in more recent years. A very good example was the way she handled the whole Mexit saga. In previous years, the tendency within the palace was to sort of just everybody calm down, it'll go away sometime soon, we hope.
If we stop looking at it will disappear.
And so things sort of lingered, and they didn't go away. And so, for example, the separation of the Prince and Princess of Wales, which was announced in 1992, it wasn't actually until 1995, after the Panorama interview, that the Queen finally said, right, look, enough's enough. I think you two really have got to get divorced now. This can't carry on. But she was, she wanted to see if she could make it work. Whereas with the Sussexes, I think right away the decision was taken, being half in, half out, semi-royal. Sometimes you're here, sometimes you're not. It's not going to work, so let's not even pretend. Let's not try and see if it works. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. And I think the speed of decision making during those few days, when I think the Sussexes were hoping to come to some sort of deal, and there was just no deal to be had.
Now, also when it comes to the Queen, obviously she took the throne in the 50s, and so much cultural and political change has happened, and not just things like COVID sort of were a shadow on her time, but the growing unhappiness in things like former British colonies, which really smarted when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge visited the Caribbean.
Yeah, that was another striking episode actually of this Jubilee year, which I've touched on in the new edition. Is that was a very unexpected result in the Caribbean. The previous Jubilee, the Diamond Jubilee, members of the family were sent off to take the Queen's Jubilee greetings around her various realms, and it was all very happy and everybody loved it. This time around, it was the Cambridges, as they still were then, William and Kate, who sort of led the charge to the Caribbean, and I think they had expected it to be a very happy tour, and that with a strong, well, not routine because it's a Jubilee and they're there on behalf of the Queen. It was going to be special, but they certainly wanted to have a strong environmental element to it. I think they expected the big sort of moment, if you like, was when they went on the first underwater royal engagement, with accompanied by a crew who were going to sort of film, the heir to the thrones and the Duchess of Cambridge swimming with sharks, which a few years ago, I mean, that would have been the big story, but actually the threat wasn't underwater. Forget the sharks. The threat was on dry land. Yeah, because it was partly that we hadn't had a big royal tour for several years because of COVID. So in a sense, people have maybe sort of slightly got out of the practice of organising these things. And also the Cambridges, now Prince and Princess of Wales, had a very young team who weren't as experienced in the sort of nuances of sort of Caribbean politics. And a lot had happened since the last big tour of the Caribbean. You'd had the Black Lives Matter movement, you had the whole Windrush scandal here, yes, entirely generated by the ineptitude of the Home Office and the British government, nothing to do with the palace at all. But that was a big thing, the whole issue of now the legacy of empire, slavery, colonisation. All these things have become much more controversial. And they all came to a head, and suddenly there were the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge turning up to sort of say, well, the Queen sends her best wishes, and suddenly you had had people sort of the small demonstrations. I mean, let's be clear, there was not they were still made very welcome, but there was much more noise. The media, and social media in particular, was a lot angrier. And they were just sort of picking up on little things. And on a royal tour, a little thing can become a big thing very quickly.
Do you think, though, that there's a sense that some of these colonies, these territories, have almost been waiting for this moment in history because they didn't want to upset the Queen? But now any subsequent monarchs will have to deal with these accusations and these issues.
I think that's how it tends to get viewed from afar. I mean, let's not forget, these aren't colonies or territories. These are independent countries that have as free and independent as Britain, as Canada, as France or Germany. I mean, Jamaica, for example, where the Prime Minister used their visit to make it certainly surprised them. It wasn't very diplomatic to sort of go, hello, welcome, and by the way, we're going to remove your family from the throne. The fact is that Jamaica became independent in 1962, and at the time chose to retain the Queen as head of state. They didn't have to. Other countries around the world, when they obtained independence from Britain, decided to, famously, starting with India, said, no, we don't want to have anything to do with the crown. We'll have a president, thanks very much. But in Jamaica and a lot of these other what were then colonies, but now independent countries, that's the constitutional model they chose. They said to the Queen, will you be our head of state? She said, yes, of course, I'd be delighted. So then it's a bit sort of, having invited someone to do something, it's a bit like asking someone to a party and then turning around a few hours into the party going, what are you doing here?
Why are you here? Yeah.
I mean, clearly, as a family, we've always made clear, it's down to the people. It's entirely a democratic decision. It's not. They're not clinging on in any way. They're there to serve, and if the people want them to do that, that's fine. However, but there have been other referenda. Not famously one in Australia, but there was actually one in the Caribbean. The most recent referendum on the Queen in St Vincent and the Grenadines in 2009, and I think lots of people expected that to go against the Crown. And actually, most people there decided, well, what do we want? Do we want another politician, or should we stick with the Queen? They stuck with the Queen.
But this debate comes up, yearly, if not more so.
Yeah,
the question of how resilient can the royal family be? Will we see continuity now that arguably the most popular monarch is no longer with us?
I mean, there has to be a change, and I think you will see, for example, in some of these realms, they're going to change. They are going to move towards a presidential model, and they're going to say, thanks very much. Well, in this case, King Charles, but we want to have a president who was born here, and that's absolutely fine. And Barbados, of course, did that this time a year ago, and Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, as he then was there to say, of course. I mean, as long as it's done properly and democratically. That's all that really matters. And I think what's important is that it's not seen as a sort of vote of confidence in King Charles III. It's constitutional political progress. It's what happens. It's inevitable. And it was interesting that Barbados decided to get rid of the crown while the Queen was alive. And other countries have done it before. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago had done it before, and Mauritius had done it before. So, it wasn't a case of let's wait until the Queen's passed away and then we'll do it. I think it's just it's evolution.
Yeah, and of course now we have the evolution of a new king, the succession. And what do you think he will take from her approach and replicate? And what do you think he might do differently to her reign?
Well, I think we've already seen a sort of a slightly more transparent approach to events. So, for example, the accession council just after the death of the Queen, there's a moment that the King is proclaimed king by the Privy Council. And the great and the good. That was on TV. That was unthinkable. I mean, there are very few actual photographs of Privy Council meetings, let alone moving image footage.
It's just so long ago. That's the thing.
Things move so fast. But I think every monarch does things differently. Every monarch does things the same. It's always the way that it's evolved. I mean, I think the coronation will be the real test of that. I think we will see changes. I think the core framework of the ceremony will be exactly as it has been for over 1,000 years. But we'll just see we'll see different touches. We'll see much less of the hereditary element, if you like. We'll see a lot more of younger people, a bigger sort of spread, demographic spread. I think that's inevitable.
But we might not have to wait for the accession to see a little hint of tradition tweaks. If I'm thinking about Christmas at Sandringham, which is just so Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Do you think that will continue, or was that just really much more of her thing and Charles will do things differently?
I think at heart, the King is he is a traditionalist. I mean, he's got lots of new ideas. Famously, always has had. He's sort of always questing. He's always thinking, reading, looking ahead. But at the same time, he holds great store in traditions that work, and I don't think he'll want to tamper too much with Christmas. I would still very much expect to see him on the airwaves at 3 p.m. I don't think he'll be moving the time or doing it differently. It's going to be. I think actually for people, aside from the day when they get their first banknote and she's not there anymore, but people don't really use money anymore because we're all contactless.
Stamps. We use stamps.
Well, we don't even use them because we do emails, and also the post office. The post is so slow that I mean, anyway. But I think one of the things that really will bring it home to people, I think it will be very poignant. Actually, I really will. 3 p.m. Christmas Day, turn on the telly, and it's not her. It's not that face.
And we'll be studying all the artefacts on the desk for clues.
All that. I mean, it will be a big. It'll be a big moment. But I mean, he's done his big broadcast already. I mean, I think that broadcast, literally the night after the Queen's death. I mean, that was the template for this reign. And he's ready. People were always saying, what sort of king's he going to be? What's he going to be like? And the reason we were always asking that question was because we didn't know, was because he regarded it as very inappropriate to be discussing his reign while his mother was alive. So he didn't. He was just doing the decent thing, which is why we were always speculating. But of course, in the same way that she was the longest reigning monarch we've ever had, he was the longest serving heir to the throne we've ever had. So he had a lot of time to think about it, a lot of thought given. And we're seeing that now. What
do you think we'll see in general with the change of the properties?
Well, I mean, the properties are certainly, in a state of flux, because you've got, if you like, all the old Prince Charles properties and all the monarch ones as well. And when you think that, there's Birkhall and Balmoral up in Scotland, he's got Highgrove, which has very much been his country base all these years. But I think we're going to see him spend a lot more time at Windsor. I think that's going to be one of the big changes. And I thought it was very telling that the King has just appointed himself as Ranger of Windsor Great Park.
We were talking about that on the show the other day, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very ancient position, going back to the Normans, and it was held longer than anyone in its entire history by Prince Philip. And I spent a wonderful day with him a few years ago. We were making a programme about Windsor and wanted to devote a whole episode to the park and the Ranger. And I got in a car with him, and we just drove around the park for a day. And I mean, you couldn't ask for a guide on a guided tour. And he was such fun.
It sounds so cool being a ranger. What does a ranger do?
Well, it does, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds, you sort of have a uniform and you're sort of putting American. Out fires. Yeah. No, it's this ancient title. It's been held by men and women over the years, and sometimes it's the monarch. I mean, the Queen's father, George VI, he enjoyed being the Ranger of the Great Park. But I think it's perfect for the King, because now, the Duchy of Cornwall, that's obviously passed on to onto the new Prince of Wales, and keeping an eye on Balmoral and Sandringham. I mean, those are private estates, and they kind of run themselves pretty well. But Windsor Great Park, it has a great deal of history, and it's something that I mean, the Duke of Edinburgh loved. Bringing his own ideas to bear on it. I mean, if there's a corner of the park which the public don't go to, where he planted a vineyard not so long ago, and it now makes sparkling white wine that is so good that they serve it at state banquets instead of champagne when they do the toasts, and they make a small amount of it each year. It's on sale in public, and it gets snapped up very quickly. He's opened a farm shop there. I'm sure Prince Charles will take a great interest in the farm shop. I suspect not all the estate is organic at the moment, but I imagine that might now change.
Yes, I suspect so.
I think that's going to come about.
And in fact, I imagine, obviously, naturally, the King's role will be shorter than his mother's. Do you think that is spurring in him any sort of impatience to make his mark and get things done?
I mean, I think he's always, from when he was a young man, realised that most of his life was going to be shaped by his time as Prince of Wales. And so he was never complacent. I mean, all previous princes of Wales just sort of sat around waiting for the top job, and often got into trouble as a result. I mean, the King, during his half a century as Prince of Wales, I mean, he was constantly on the go, constantly full of ideas, and I think that sort of same energy he's bringing to the role now. I don't think there's any sense of him sort of sitting back and thinking, well, I'm king now. I think he's got he just has to channel his energies in different directions, and we're going to see that very soon. There's going to be the first state visit of the reign coming up to the President of South Africa, and let's not forget he's just become head of the Commonwealth as well, so there's a lot to do there. He seems in taking on the job of Ranger of the Great Park. I think it's also a sign that he's a workaholic. Well,
that's good news, because he's obviously as well inherited the too difficult folder.
Yes.
And what do you think's in there for him, top of the pile?
Well, I think the same folder that
starts with A.
I think the Duke of York and the Duke of Sussex. Those clearly, the Duke of Sussex's book is an issue. The Sussex's Duke and Duchess of Sussex's film with Netflix. That's an issue. But I think he's over the years he's in the same way that the Queen, approached these things as rather like her father taught her to when he was in the Navy. It's sort of, storms pass, you get on with it, and sometimes you have to batten down the hatches. But I think that his main focus is going to be coronation and then, after that, I think we've then got over the idea of, the newness of the reign. Then it becomes a sort of settled new order, and I think that's uppermost in his mind. But yeah, too difficult. Our brother, son, and and I think what you touched on earlier actually is some of the realms thinking about their constitutional future, and he'll be very keen to make sure that whatever changes happen, that it's very amicable.
Yeah.
That he is in no way seen as standing in the way of this. It's entirely down to the people, and whatever the result, we will be friends. That will be his message.
Well, I'll say one thing, a busy king means a busy Palace Confidential, so we'll have tons to talk about in 2023. That's all we have time for now, though. A reminder that a new commemorative edition of Robert's book, Queen of Our Times, The Life of Elizabeth II, 1926 to 2022, is out now. If you want to buy it, you can click the link below. And for our American viewers, there is a slightly different cover, which you will see up on screen now. That is all we have time for today. Thank you so much to Robert Hardman, our guest, and to you for watching. Join us again on Thursday for another Palace Confidential.